Hi, in this video, we're going to talk about IELTS Writing Task 1 for General Training Exam, also known as the letter writing task. We're going to look at the types of letters you might have to write, formal, semi-formal, and informal, and you learn how to recognize each one from the task prompt. We're also going to address one of the most challenging aspects of this task, and that's getting the tone right. You'll see what tone actually means, how to make sure your tone stays consistent throughout your letter, and of course, what the IELTS band descriptors say about it. IELTS General Training Writing Task 1 requires you to write a short letter or an email. Yes, people still write letters apparently. This task asks you to respond to an everyday situation. And the key phrase here is everyday situation. So it's not academic, it's everyday. It's about general real life topics. You're also given three specific bullet points that you must address in your response. And remember, this task counts as 1/3 of your total writing score, while task 2 makes up the remaining 2/3. You should check the video in the description for a full breakdown of the writing test. Now, let's go over some basic facts. You must write at least 150 words. It's recommended that you spend around 20 minutes on this task, which is 1/3 of your writing time. Writing significantly under 150 words will definitely lower your score, but writing over 200 words will not boost it. So if you're aiming for band 7, 8, or 9, your goal should be around 170, 180 words. The prompt, like the one you see on the screen, always describes a situation. It puts you in a context. It also tells you who you must write to. Maybe it's a friend, your manager, or a company. And it explains why you're writing, which is really important to get right. You'll see why later in the video. As I've mentioned, the task also lists three content points that you must cover in your letter. All three need to be addressed with relevant detail. If you skip any of them, you will be penalized and your score for task achievement will be affected. And just to remind you once again, IELTS General Training Writing Task 1 is about general interest topics. There's absolutely nothing academic about it. The topics are everyday situations like requesting information, thanking someone, writing a complaint. You will not be asked to describe data, charts, maps, or graphs. That's for the academic test. So, to sum up, the main goal here for you is to show that you can communicate effectively in English in a practical, real life context. When you move to an English speaking country or start working or studying there, you'll be writing these kinds of messages all the time. Your job now in the IELTS exam is to fulfill the task requirements, organize your letter well, and use appropriate language and tone. And we'll talk more about some of these requirements in the rest of the video. Now, let's talk about some of the most common scenarios and types of letters that you'll be writing in IELTS General Training Task 1. In this task, you'll be writing either a formal, a semi-formal, or an informal letter, depending on the situation. The instructions, the scenario itself, will tell you who you're writing to and why you're doing that. And that, of course, determines the tone of your letter, which basically puts it into one of these three categories: formal, semi formal, or informal. And it's absolutely crucial that you identify this correctly. You have to know right from the start, is this formal, informal, or semi formal? Because that decision will guide your tone, your vocabulary, and even the grammar of your letter. So let's go through all three of them. Formal letters are written to someone you don't know personally. For example, you might be writing to a company, to a manager of a hotel, to a bank, to a newspaper editor, or to a college admissions office. In these cases, you don't know exactly who the person is. You are addressing a role, a title. You're addressing an organization, not a specific friend or acquaintance. So, formal letters are used in strictly professional situations like complaining to a company about a faulty product or applying for a job, applying for a scholarship, making an inquiry to an organization, or dealing with a serious or business matter. In formal letters, you often write to a title or a position, not a name. So things like Dear Sir or Madam, or Dear HR Department Manager. And here the tone must be always polite, respectful, and rather official. On the other hand, informal letters are written to someone you do know personally, a friend or a family member, someone with whom you have an informal relationship. And by the way, every time I say letter, remember in this situation for IELTS, it could also be an email. It's the same thing here. Informal letters are about personal or social topics. For example, you might be thanking a friend or a relative. You might be inviting a friend to visit, apologizing to a friend, sharing news, or asking for advice. The style here is obviously friendly, warm, casual, but pay attention, it still has to be well organized and clear. It's not like sending a quick message on WhatsApp. It still needs proper structure, but it should sound natural and more conversational. Semi formal letters are somewhere in between. These are letters written to someone you know, but you know them in a formal or official capacity. So it could be a letter to a colleague at work, or a teacher, or a manager, or even a neighbor, someone you're familiar with, but not really close friends with. The content could be either personal or professional. Maybe you're writing to a neighbor about a problem, or you're writing to a colleague about, something work related. You know the person, but the situation still requires you to be polite and respectful. Semi formal letters usually sound polite and professional, like a formal letter, but they're also a bit more personal because there's some kind of existing connection. So, to wrap this up, there are three main types of letters that you could be asked to write: formal, semi formal, and informal. The situation and the person you're writing to determine which category your letter falls into. And once you know that, the category determines the type of language and the tone you're going to use. Okay, here's a little quiz for you. We are practicing tone and formality for General IELTS Writing Task 1. I'll give you a few situations and you decide. Is it a formal, semi formal, or informal letter that you'll be writing? Situation number one: you're sending an email to your mobile operator to complain about poor service at your apartment. What do you think? Formal, semi formal, or informal? Situation number two: you're asking a friend of yours for advice on places you should visit when you travel to their country. What type of letter would that be? Next one: you're sending an email to propose a work meeting to a colleague. Next, you've decided to leave your company and you're writing an official resignation letter to inform them. Pay attention, I said official resignation letter. Next situation: you're sending a letter to the immigration office to give them an update on some documents they've asked you to submit. So, immigration office. Next one: you're thanking a friend for their hospitality. Maybe you stayed at their home during a visit. And the last one, an ex colleague of yours has asked you to write a letter of recommendation for a job they are applying for. All right, let's check the situations together. The first one, you're writing to your mobile operator to complain about poor service at your apartment. You actually have no idea who you're writing to because you're addressing a company, not a specific person. So this one is a formal one. And, if you want them to solve the problem, you definitely want to sound official and polite. So formal it is for this one. Situation number two, you're writing to a friend, keyword friend, to ask for advice about places to visit in their country. You're writing to a friend, it's an informal one. Next one, you're proposing a work meeting to a colleague. This is a typical semi-formal situation. You know the person, you work together, but the topic is work related. So semi-formal is definitely the right choice here. In the next situations, you are leaving your company and you're writing an official resignation letter. And that's a formal situation. Even if you're sending it to a person who you know very well, because it's an official company document, it needs to sound formal and professional. Next, you're sending a letter to the immigration office. So you're communicating with an institution. That's definitely going to be a formal letter. In the following situation, you're thanking a friend for their hospitality. There's a friend involved. We don't need to know about the situation. That's definitely an informal one. And finally, an ex colleague of yours has asked you to write a letter of recommendation for a job they're applying for. Now, this one might sound a little bit tricky because the person who asked you to write is someone you know. But remember, the letter itself is being sent to a company or an employer. So that makes it a formal one. Letter tone refers to the style or the level of formality of your writing, essentially how you address the reader, how you talk to the reader. And finding the right tone and using it consistently throughout your letter or email is absolutely crucial. That tone has to match both the audience and the situation. And this is one of the most problematic aspects of writing task one. And here's why. Writing a short letter or email about 150 words, that's not a big task, but getting the tone right is where most students struggle. Many of my students are professionals. They use English at work every single day. They write reports, they send emails, they attend meetings, they're used to business English. But when they're asked to write an informal letter for IELTS, there's absolutely nothing informal about it because they simply don't have informal language. They never use English in that context. And that's a major challenge for them. And then there's the opposite group, my younger students, usually those applying for university. They communicate in English all the time, every day, but in social or casual situations. And when they get a formal letter task, their writing is absolutely everything but formal because the language they know and use every day is informal. So for them, the challenge is learning formal expressions and style. So if you're someone who normally uses English for work, you'll probably need help with informal letters. And if you use English only with friends or online, you want to focus more on practicing formal letters. Let's now examine the tone a bit deeper. In formal letters, you want to be respectful, you want to be polite, and you want to be professional. Your goal is to sound serious and clear, not cold, but professional. So basically, avoid anything that sounds casual or conversational. No slang, no abbreviations, and definitely no emojis. For example, in a formal complaint or a formal request, you might say something like, I'm writing to express my dissatisfaction with the product I received and to request a full refund. That's a very typical formal sentence. Formal writing tends to be tends to use slightly longer and more complex sentences, and you often see the passive voice or modal verbs used very frequently. So, for example, uh, it has come to my attention that da 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 da, or I would like to request that the issue be resolved as soon as possible. Another important thing in formal writing, avoid contractions. Avoid things like I'm, I'll, I didn't. Write them out in full. I am, I will, I did not. That alone already makes your writing sound more formal. And then, of course, there's the vocabulary. And this is usually the trickiest part. You want to use formal equivalents instead of everyday words. So instead of saying buy, you say purchase. Instead of ask, you request. Instead of help, you ask for assistance. Instead of tell, you say inform. Instead of get, you say receive or obtain. And instead of fix, you may say repair or resolve. Or, for example, instead of writing, can you please pay me back as soon as possible, you write, could you please refund the amount at your earliest convenience? Notice how that sounds much more polite and professional, but it's saying the exact same thing. Informal letters are typically warm and conversational because you're usually writing to a friend or a family member, someone you know well, someone you are comfortable with. And here, it's absolutely appropriate to use contractions. In fact, you should use them. Words like I'm, your, can't, don't, I'll. That's completely fine. It sounds natural. You can also use idiomatic expressions and phrasal verbs because that's how people speak in real life. The tone can be much more direct and emotional. So, for example, you might say, I was so happy to hear you're coming, or I'm just writing to let you know about some travel tips. It's also fine to use first names and even a bit of humor or exclamation marks, as long as it fits the situation and doesn't sound exaggerated. Of course, the vocabulary is completely different from formal writing. You use everyday words instead of formal ones. So instead of saying at your earliest convenience, you'd simply say when you're free. Instead of I would like to invite you, you'd say, why don't you come? Instead of please respond at your earliest convenience, you'd say write back as soon as you can. Instead of I'm writing to inform you that I have moved to a new apartment, you'd say just wanted to let you know I moved to a new place. See how that sounds much more natural and friendly. In informal letters, you can also show emotion and personality. So you can say things like, it was so nice catching up with you last weekend, or I can't wait to see you again, or even you won't believe what happened yesterday. That's the kind of tone that creates warmth and connection, which is exactly what you want in an informal letter. In semi-formal letters, your goal is to sound polite but also somewhat personal. It's a balance between formal and neutral phrasing. You know the person you're writing to, maybe it's a colleague, it could be your teacher, your manager, or even a neighbor, but the situation still requires respect and professionalism. So the tone should not be distant, but it also shouldn't read like you're texting a friend, because you're not. In semi-formal letters, you want to avoid slang or overly casual language, but you still want to sound natural. You can use contractions sometimes, things like I'm, your, as long as you keep the tone polite and consistent. You're not going to start your email with dear sir or madam. That would be too formal. But you're also not going to start it with hey there or what's up either. Let's let's look at an example. Imagine you're writing to a colleague to let them know you need a few days off next week. And here's the Semi-formal version, which is exactly what you should aim for. Listen to this one. I'm writing to let you know I'll need a few days off next week because of a family situation. I hope this doesn't cause any inconvenience, and I'll make sure all my work is up to date before I'm away. This is polite, this is clear, this is respectful. It's professional, but it still sounds natural. Now, let's look at what happens if it becomes too formal. Listen to this version. I'm writing to inform you that I shall require a short leave of absence next week due to a personal matter. I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience this may cause and will endeavor to complete all outstanding tasks prior to my departure. And this one sounds stiff, it sounds distant, a bit like you're writing to a government office, not someone you actually know. But let's now go the other way. Let's hear the informal version of this. Hey, just wanted to let you know I can't come in next week. Got some stuff going on with my family. Hope that's cool. That's it. That's something you would text a friend. You wouldn't send that to a manager. You wouldn't send that to a colleague. So the semi-formal version sits right in the middle. In semi-formal letters, you can use expressions like, I hope you're doing well. Thank you for your understanding. Please let me know if this works for you. These expressions are friendly, but they're still very professional. You should generally avoid phrasing, extreme phrasing on either side. Don't try things like, I hereby request permission. That's overly formal. But also, don't write, just wanted to ask if it's cool. That's just way too casual. By now, you should be able to see how striking the right tone is absolutely crucial in IELTS General Training Writing Task 1. This is explicitly mentioned in the scoring criteria in the official band descriptors, so it's a good idea to have a look at what they actually say. So for band 5, the descriptor says the tone may be variable and sometimes inappropriate. What does that mean? Well, it means that throughout your letter, the tone isn't consistent. Sometimes it sounds formal, sometimes it sounds informal, sometimes it's a bit off for the situation. In other words, you're mixing things up. For band 6, it says there may be minor inconsistencies in tone, may be minor inconsistencies. That means that most of the time your tone is appropriate, but there are still small slips, maybe a phrase or a few words that don't quite match the situation. So, you see, to reach band 6, you need to show that you generally know what tone to use and you keep it mostly consistent. However, when you move up to band 7, the descriptor says very clearly, tone is consistent and appropriate to the task. That's the key difference. To get band 7, the tone needs to be absolutely spot on from beginning to end. Consistent, appropriate, and natural for the situation you're writing about. Now, the tone isn't mentioned in bands 8 and 9, and that's because by that stage, it's already perfect. If you've reached band 7 for tone, you've already mastered it. All right, to sum up, when you're reading the prompt for IELTS General Training Writing Task 1, you need to be absolutely clear about who you're writing to and why you're doing that. Those two things will determine the type of letter you're going to write and the tone you're going to use, whether it's formal, semi-formal, or informal. Getting this right is the foundation for everything else in your letter. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to organize your letter, and I'll show you exactly what structure you should follow when writing your response step by step with a real example. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.